So a lot of people needed filled in for week 4, but I still think we can answer this question, right? We saw persecution often follow missionaries into new cultures. Why might that be true today? So just for a recap, we talked a lot about Christian missionaries reaching the new world. So whether that be South America or where we primarily focused on was Asia. So missionaries reaching Asia. Had a story about martyrs in Japan. We talked about a martyr in Korea. So when we have martyrs going into missionary areas, which we have discussed before, but not necessarily at length, where we're seeing it primarily reaching missionaries, which again makes sense when Christianity is accepted in an area. It's less and less hostile towards because everybody's Christian in a certain area. Then when you start to go out to the nations, that's when you run into trouble, at least in that part of history. So again, whether you were here or not for week 4 to hear the stories about the Koreans, I'm sure, or the Japanese or the other Asian countries, why do you think that it might be true that missionaries face that persecution? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the gospel is offensive when you confront people with their sin. That's, sometimes can be taken the wrong way, for sure. Or they're not going to like it. Yeah. Mostly when they've shared. Exceptions exist, but mostly when they shared. Some were, they had been missionaries. They had, for the example of Japan, they're tolerated at first. And then once they start getting converts, they're like, no, we are not a Christian nation. And he actually crucifies several of them to say, you see what happens to Christians in Japan? We don't do that here. So it is mostly when they share or when they start to convert others. Anything else? Political? Yeah, it's definitely the Japan one that I was telling you about. The emperor's power, very similar. Again, not the exact same, but very similar to the Romans, where it was tied with political power. Religion was tied with political power. Put it on my desk. Absolutely. And then you also have, what about culture? Does culture have anything to do with this? Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Nobody likes change, right? Nobody likes change. And when you've done something for hundreds or thousands of years, you don't want other people telling you how to do it differently. And that could be something, really small, such as, days of the week and worshiping and things like that. Or what you hold sacred, what you don't, those types of things. I don't know if anybody's ever traveled overseas where you have, different customs and, you're like, wow, this is weird in the sense that we don't do that here. Imagine if all these people start doing that within your country, that's gonna be a problem, right? Immigration, people moving from one place to the other, that is not a new thing, right? Turn on the news and it's gonna seem like it just happened yesterday. But immigration and all that has been an issue since the beginning of time, right? What about similarities you expect between ancient persecution and modern persecution? So we did talk about, the political power and all that. What else? Is there anything else that we haven't talked about? Yeah, and we talked about that with Rome, that sometimes, it was pockets here and pockets there. At least at the beginning. Yeah, so it has that in similarity. And then, you talk about like the Diocletian persecutions where it is at least a little bit more of the whole Roman Empire. Yeah, absolutely. So it's going to be, a little bit more sporadic for sure, or separate, dispersed. What else? Yeah, absolutely. Make an example of. We're going to talk a lot about that today, unfortunately. Is making an example out of someone. You better not do that here. That's not how we worship, or that's, hey, look, those people are not welcome here, or whatever it might be. Yeah, absolutely. Make an example out of. And again, it's one thing that I'll add that I think, is true, whether, you're being one of the disciples being persecuted, or you're in 2026, as it kind of goes to what Michael was saying, is like Jesus as Lord is very exclusive. You're not leaving any room for anything else. You're not saying, well, yeah, Buddha, no, you're saying Jesus is Lord and that's it. like he's the one. And that's very exclusive. And whether you're in the Roman culture or sometimes even in 2026 in our modern culture, that can offend. Why do you think Christians in the West are largely unaware of modern persecution? Before I get answers, I think Crossroads does a really good job of talking to missionaries and getting an idea of what's going on. One of probably the best midweeks I ever went to was, I'm so sorry I forgot their name, but they talked about being a missionary in China and being ready to sing happy birthday because they were doing baptisms out in the middle of the woods. I was like, wow, like that's what I'm talking about. Like that's, you're worried about what could happen to you and all of that, and having to live this on the front lines. I felt educated. I wasn't there. I wasn't, I'm not necessarily in this every single day, but I felt like, wow, that's what it means to be persecuted. Or, when we talk about like what's going on in Nigeria right now, I think Crossroads is pretty well educated. So I hope you did not take offense to the last one. I didn't mean you personally, but just like the church in general. Not paying attention? Yeah. Out of sight, out of mind? Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great example. Absolutely. We think of that as something that happened long ago, that it's not necessarily concerning. It's not something that we have to worry about anymore. It's out of sight, out of mind. Do you guys know who Sarah McLachlan is? You're having a good day. What's that? Yeah, absolutely. The ASPCA, yeah. You're having a good day, everything is going fine, and then all of a sudden she makes you feel bad because there are puppies starving and you could do something about it, right? That makes you feel bad, right? I want to let you know right now there are starving kids in Africa. You came up here and you ate your bread and drank your coffee without the knowledge that there are children starving in Africa. I'm not saying we're bad people, but we're not always thinking about the bad that's going on at all times. And so sometimes when it's not right under our nose, we tend to forget about it. And I don't think that's a condemnation. I think that's life. And so we have to be intentional about, understanding what's going on in the world around us. Or it could be exactly as everybody was saying, out of sight, out of mind, which again is why those commercials are so effective. It's because it puts it in front of your face again. So, all right. So kind of my beginning story here. This is a man named Jim Elliot. So Jim Elliot grew up in Oregon. He grew up in the 1920s and 30s during the Great Depression. And he was just a regular person. He is not somebody who, was a biblical scholar or anything like that. He was just an average person. Really just the biggest highlight of his life is how much he was discipled by his parents. His parents weren't like, a pastor or anything. He was just discipled really well. Even for that time when I would say that, Christianity wasn't as having so much hostility towards it, he was seen as someone who defended the Bible. There's stories of him condemning some of the dances because they were ungodly and quoting the Bible. And so he was just a biblical kid. He was too young to fight in World War II, but he was, thinking about potentially being what's called a conscientious objector. Again, he never had to make that decision because he was too young. The war ended, but it just kind of shows you that he took his faith really seriously, and he wanted to think about, the ramifications of what God really wants from him. And he goes to college in Illinois. And has, meets some friends, and he reads the Great Commission, like a lot of us, and he says, well, I need to be doing, Jesus told me to do something, told us to do something, I need to do my part. And he felt very called to reach tribes that had not had any reach to missionaries, that missionaries had not been able to reach. And there are several throughout the world. There are fewer than there were, but there are still some some native groups that have not had missionaries reach them, or, as we're going to learn, are killed as soon as they try. And so he goes to the Waorani tribe, I believe is how you say that. It actually has a different name as well, but it depends on if you translate it into English or Spanish. And this is in Ecuador. And so the idea is to slowly gain their trust. They would go over with a loudspeaker and drop gifts from an airplane, and then like slowly, like start making camp just a little bit closer. And some warriors come out and treat them well. They hang out. They even take one of the guys for a ride in the airplane because he's like, what on earth is this? And they're friendly, and then the next day they come back with some gifts. They're like, all right, we're making progress slowly but surely, trying to get them to trust us. You can't start with the gospel. Sometimes it's like, hey, we're here not to kill you. And so they're doing that, and then all of a sudden one day they wake up to about 10 warriors, and they don't say anything. They just come in and spear them to death. We don't know why. We don't know what made them change their minds. We don't know what happened, but he gave up everything, even a new wife, which, you know what me and Jim Elliott have in common? Both married people named Elizabeth Howard. So, yeah. Yeah. So we have a brand new wife who joins him in the mission field part-time. He is killed with several of his friends there, trying to spread the gospel to people that have been unreached. And a lot of people are like, to be frank, like, what an idiot. Like, you're going to these people that are going to kill you, and you go do it anyway. And they actually, people are saying that, and they find his journal. And in the journal, he says this quote, "He is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose." So he is no fool, so you're not a fool, if you give what you cannot keep, your life, to gain what you cannot lose. Doing what God asked you to do. And that's become a motto. They actually made a documentary about it. It's been, probably 15 years ago or so. It's a little older. But in my opinion, the best part of his story is his wife. Tell us. Absolutely right. She was able to bring the same people who murdered her husband to Christ. To me, that's the greatest part of the story. Is first off, that's not even a martyr story. That's a forgiveness story, I think. But yeah, absolutely. And so good was able to come out of that. And I think that people like Jim Elliott, who again were called dumb or whatever, was able to, because he was obedient to what Christ had called him to do. And so that's kind of, I think, a good starting point for the modern missionaries is what I'm calling it. So where is persecution happening today? Well, and again, I don't necessarily mean today as in right this second, because again, it depends on how you define persecution, right? So I'm going to stick to more of the violence in some of these areas, and then kind of work for as close to current day as I can. So if I'm missing some current day stuff, it's because I got to save something for next week. East Asia, so China, North Korea especially, Middle East, Iraq, Syria, even in places like Saudi Arabia, Nigeria, Sudan, there's definitely something we're going to talk about next week. And then India and Pakistan. Now, what I think is encouraging is if you look at where the most persecution is happening, a lot of those countries are on the list. But then if you were able to take a chart of the fastest growing churches, they would be almost identical. So where the church is facing persecution, the church is growing. And so I think that should be very encouraging. You don't, the enemy doesn't fight anywhere where, it's already won, right? I really believe that. I think that it's being fought because it's working, it's winning, it's doing what it's supposed to do, and it's growing. And so I think that is really encouraging. But yeah, it's definitely in these areas, and it's being done in different ways. So one of the things that when we talk about modern martyrdom, it is on a spectrum. So what is a spectrum? Absolutely, right? Sorry, my students have absolutely no idea what that is, and I'm having to draw like the rainbow and like try to explain it that way. But yeah, absolutely. It is a scale, right? You have the extremes, you have the less extremes in the middle, absolutely. Well, martyrdom is like that. So we might see, because remember, martyrdom does not mean death, right? What does martyrdom mean? Witness, to witness, right? And so sometimes there's extreme persecution and what you could see as martyrdom in a less extreme way. And then you see maybe some in a little bit more extreme way. So this first one here is violent persecution. This is the one that, unfortunately we do see a lot of in the Middle East. So this is going to be executions. This is going to be terrorist attacks. This is going to be mob violence. This is going to be anything that results in injury or death. And a lot of this is because of the world that we live in with modern day, radical Islam. And I don't know, again, this is not supposed to be a class on Islam, but, and again, not to be super controversial, but I think a lot of them are people that just need Jesus. I really do. I think that they're following a false religion, and we need to bring them to Jesus. But I do think too many of them are getting back to the roots of their religion and using it to do something bad. There's something called abrogation in Islam, where they'll have a saying or a teaching, and then a later saying and teaching abrogates the following. And so that's what in Islam right now, they're trying to, some of the scholars are like, yeah, this is the teaching of Muhammad you follow, and that's the teaching of, honestly, that doesn't necessarily matter to me. I don't really care. I just say that they need Jesus, the real Jesus. But what's important for us in Martyrs is that they are interpreting some of that as there is no accepting anyone of different faiths. And so that's why you're seeing a lot of violence. Now, what is also true is that some of these people are using religion as an excuse. They're using a religion as an excuse to do political ends. Sound familiar, right? We've talked about that a bunch. Where it's more about colonialism, it's more about different politics than it is about religion, but they're using religion as an excuse. Now, that again, it's complicated. It's a scale. So yes, absolutely, there are some of the fanatics that are actually carrying this out. And we're going to talk more about that. My last story has to do with that. But that's where you're seeing a lot of the actual violence. You're seeing people die. You're seeing people executed. You're seeing terrorist attacks. And again, I hope you could appreciate my frankness, is because people are following fake religion. State persecution, this would be China and North Korea. The thing is when you look at religion, just religion in general, and you look at how you're supposed to live morally, right? You're like, what is that? What is that moral life? Or what is the higher calling? And I think that a lot of people misunderstand that in the sense that in places like North Korea, places like China, places like the former Soviet Union, they are not atheists. They just replace God with the state. And so the government becomes that religion that tells you what is the correct behavior and what is the incorrect behavior. And so if you have people that are telling the truth about Jesus, well, then that undermines the state's authority. Again, it's very similar to what the Romans are doing. They don't necessarily think Kim Jong-un is a god per se, even though if you study what they think about him, you might, more or less. But China would be a great example as well, is the Communist Party, the CCP. Again, the highest calling, what says right or wrong, is the people, AKA the Communist Party central planners. And so anything that has to do with religion or Christianity, especially saying, no, you're not the highest authority, God is the highest authority, is going to be seen as a problem. And so they're going to face imprisonment, surveillance, and the banning of churches. The underground church in some of these places like China is thriving because of that. But again, that could be considered persecution as well. And then social persecution. I put various because I tried to put countries' names down, and I'm like, oh, that happens there too. Ah, that happens there too. Oh, that happens here. But again, as we said, it's a scale. So I'm not saying that this is in the extreme in all these countries, or it's in the less extreme in all these countries. It is somewhere in there. And that is job loss, family rejection, and community exclusion. I've read a lot of stories about this happening in Egypt, where people are converting to Christianity, and they're not necessarily, being killed, but they're losing their job. Their family rejects them. If you've ever read about Nabil Qureshi, he has, family rejects him for a while. Community exclusion. You do, and then even just with that, going back to the violence, you have people that, if you're a Muslim apostate and you leave, Islam, like some of them are killed for that. They're saying that is the honorable thing to do. So kind of takes that family rejection there to the next point there. But that's what the modern persecution and modern martyrdom looks like. You do have missionaries coming in, just like last week, but it's older Christian conclaves. It is missionaries. It is younger groups, or just free thinking of ideas. Looking at different, Muslim cultures, for example, when they get on the internet or when they're able to access the free world, how much they reject what they're being told, and a lot are accepting Christ. Maybe not as much as if we can get people on the ground, but more than you would think. So why is that? And again, we talked about that exclusivity. Jesus is Lord cancels out everything else, right? There's no other answers but Christ. And again, we know that. But when you're trying to tell that to another group who says, no, my way of thinking, the CCP, the emperor, again, that could be signs for persecution. Political control, and then cultural conflict. That's not how we're used to doing things. Just something as simple as not. So for example, in Saudi Arabia, they are 100% Muslim. There is not a single Christian that has ever been in Saudi Arabia. According to the Saudi Arabian government, that's absolutely not true. I personally know Christians who have been to Saudi Arabia. But again, according to the Saudi Arabian government, there's Saudis, there's not. It's 100% Muslim. Living there is 100% Muslim. And, I've heard stories of where, when the call to prayer happens, like everything shuts down. Like, I mean, you're not, getting your groceries checked out in the line. Like everything shuts down. And I've known people where they're just like, I don't know what to do. And so they just keep walking, and everybody stares at them like, what on earth are you doing? Or during Ramadan, and again, some of these areas are more liberal than others. So some of these, may not be, but Saudi Arabia being pretty conservative in conservative areas, and you're sitting there, eating, during, walking down the street eating or something during Ramadan, like you're going to get stares. You're going to be like, oh, what are you doing? And Saudi Arabia even has what's called the vice police. If you're doing things that are against, Muslim teachings or what they want to do. So those are just some little cultural conflicts that, that Christian is rubbing us the wrong way, because look at him eating during our time, or hey, not, answering the call to prayer, whatever it is. Am I going too fast? Okay, good. I feel like I'll go, I was going too fast. Sorry about that. Going full circle here to the 21 Coptic martyrs. So does anybody know what Coptic is? Yeah, absolutely, right? I actually learned something while I was doing research on this. I thought that they were Eastern Orthodox, like that they had communion with the Eastern Orthodox Church. There are actually Coptic churches that have communion with the Roman Catholic Church, and that consider themselves, we wouldn't necessarily call them Protestant, but evangelical, where they don't have any affiliation with the Eastern Orthodox, with the Catholic Church. I had no idea. They are smaller, from what I understand. But yeah, absolutely. They are primarily in Egypt, but they've been there since the beginning, right? Since the beginning of Christianity. They are descendant from the ancient Egyptians, just like their fellow Egyptians, their Muslim Egyptians. But they are a Christian kind of conclave there. And there were some construction workers that were Coptic, right? So in Lower Egypt, so that'd be up near Cairo and all of that, a lot of the Coptics are college educated and they work in white collar jobs. But in Upper Egypt, so the southern part, they are more blue collar. And so they are going to Libya to work as construction workers. And ISIS there in Libya ends up capturing 21 of them and says, lines them up on a beach and asks them to accept Islam and denounce Christ, and they would be spared. And they're videotaping this, putting this on the internet. This is in 2015. And they all shout together, Ya Rabba Yusa, which is Jesus is Lord or Jesus is God. And they are beheaded pretty brutally there on the beach. And again, they are sent out. The sick part of this is that it's put out by like news organizations as this is what you get for being Christian in our areas. This is what you get for not accepting Islam. This is what you get for declaring that Christ is Lord. That's what you get for, to reminisce of Romans, for being pagan, right? They would say that because of the Trinity, they would consider us pagan. And so they ended up, again, dying, but because at the very end, they refused to give up Christ. They refused to become Muslim, even though it would have been easier, even though it would have saved their lives. And it shows on TV, everybody's able to see that, hey, this is what living for Christ looks like sometimes. And so this is happening, not even just to missionaries. This is happening to local Christian groups who are just living their lives. And look, I'm not making any sort of comment on missionaries or anything like that, like that they're out doing it. These guys were working construction. These guys were just living their lives and were saying, hey, look, that you can't do that. So it's not just the missionaries; it's your everyday people that are facing this. So I want to have a lot of group discussion time because we're going to kind of lead into week 6 here. Getting more to not even just modern day, but today. And so hopefully some of these stories and kind of some of the reasons why you have some of the persecution, hopefully some of these questions will provoke some discussion. But give you about half the time, and then the other half we can kind of come together. If you guys are good. All right. I was waiting. I'm sorry. I didn't want. That was like a long 2 minutes, by the way. But I was trying to wait on this table. Sorry. So I kind of asked this question at the beginning of class. In week 4, what is the difference between ancient and the modern? But have we added to or changed or modified the answer to that question for what we learned today? Has it changed? Has it stayed the same? Persecution or martyrdom in the modern era? Yeah, I mean, I definitely don't like hearing that people are being beheaded, but I got to tell you, I mean, it strengthened my faith thinking that, about what had happened. And I don't, maybe that was the point. Maybe somebody, comes to faith through that or something like that. I don't know. But yeah, no, I totally see what you're saying. So anybody else, anything to add to, yes, it's the same. Yeah, the church continues to grow. Yeah, we, for one of the other questions, yeah, we kind of get into that. The church continues to grow. More people are converting to Christianity, than they have previously. I mean, we kind of ebb and flow, but yeah, absolutely. Church continues to grow, especially in these persecuted areas. Yeah, they don't have the advantage of kind of what Josh was saying about that. Yeah, if you're ever curious about that, go to google.com and type in Tiananmen Square, and then go to google.cn and type in Tiananmen Square and see if you get any different results. But yeah, China, I mean, it's it's about as close to 1984 as you can get. I mean, I would say North Korea, but they're just so backwards with their technology. They're not there. But I mean, you get something called a social credit score, like how loyal you are to the government and like how nice you are. I mean, it's like a credit score. Like, yeah, the higher the credit, you get certain jobs, you get certain loans. Yeah, absolutely. So modern martyrdom could be in former, well, I don't want to, maybe former is too strong of a word, but Christian areas that are maybe a little less Christian than they used to be. Absolutely. That is definitely a change. Winston Churchill is really famous for the quote that it's time for the new world to save the old. He was talking about World War II, right? Like, we need help. we're barely hanging on. But I've heard that quote actually applied to places like Africa or places in Asia where the church is thriving, where it's like it's the new world's turn, to go save the old. Meaning like the new where Christianity had been spread to, it kind of needs to go back to its roots. Absolutely. One thing I was going to say was I don't necessarily think that Jim Elliot was killed because of power or culture or control. I think he was killed because they didn't know who he was. He was an outsider. I think when you get to some of these very primitive areas, or people that don't have that sense, like it could be dangerous just because of who you are, not necessarily because of your message. I was telling somebody that sometimes it's dangerous to go to these people because you could wipe them out with a plague because you carry certain diseases. There's a tribe in India that's a big problem. The Indian government doesn't allow anybody near it because they're afraid you go in with the sniffles and you take out half the tribe because they don't have the antibodies that you have. So and I mean that's not a new problem. We do that all the time. So a lot of people think that we came over here and brought smallpox and tuberculosis and all that stuff over here. We did. The Europeans did, but we also took stuff back with us. So it was back and forth. Actually, the number one thing that was spread from the New World to the Old was syphilis. So, again, it's been happening since the beginning. So why does it continue to face persecution across very different cultures and political systems? Do what? I'm sorry.
It still replaces earthly authority with Jesus.
Yeah, I honestly, that's when you accept Christ, like you're not just, putting Christ in your life, like you're putting Christ at the center of your life, right? You're supposed to, everything is supposed to revolve around Jesus. I think that's hard to accept. That's hard to accept for a lot of people, but that's hard to accept for somebody who thinks that, the emperor or this culture or this, lifestyle is more important than Jesus is or what Jesus says. I think Michael said it perfectly about the gospel being offensive. If the gospel was super easy and chill and, you could just add it and it lets you do whatever you want. You're the center of the universe, not Jesus. Jesus is cool. He's cool with anything you do. Then I don't think we would be having this discussion. But Jesus makes an absolute truth statement that Jesus is who he says he was, and he proved it. I 100% agree is that it replaces the heavenly authority with earthly authority, and earthly authorities are not a big fan of that. Anything else on that one? I always find a way to squeeze this in at every class I teach. But history is not math. History does not, you change the 1 to a 0 here, and then it changes the formula. History is complex. It is an art. It is not a science. A lot of people try to do history in a science or a math kind of way. It is an art form. You are putting cause and effect relationships into a narrative. That takes work. It takes an art. When you look at some of these, history does not repeat itself, but it definitely rhymes. The same themes are popping up over and over again. It might be a different time. It might be a different place. It might be for a different reason, but you're seeing the same things over and over again. I hope you're seeing that. That history isn't repeating, but it is throwing the same themes at you over and over and over again. Power, control, culture problems. So, why do you think persecution often strengthens the church rather than destroy it? Yeah. Yeah, when I was, coming to Christ and I was almost there, but one of the pastors of the church we were going to said something that has stuck with me, and I'm sure you've heard it. It's pretty common, but just like in all of these religions, you're working to get to God, but with Christianity, God comes down to you. You don't have to work up to Him, and so yeah, I think that takes a lot of faith, and I think persecution highlights that faith and strengthens the faith over time. And so the more you persecute, the stronger your faith becomes, or the stronger your faith can become. Anybody else on that one? Something, you don't have to answer this right away. Do you think the lack of persecution makes the church lazy? I know when I'm, tired, or I'm like, I think I was telling you guys, 10 o'clock super early, when I'm like, I don't want to go, and then these people are walking barefoot, 3-4 miles to get to church and staying there for 6 hours, that definitely puts it in perspective that, I take for granted that we live in a free country where, I'm able to, go to church without fear of arrest or anything like that for now. So, what about this one? Wrap up on, I know we're almost there. What responsibility do Christians in safe and comfortable societies? I think that's a good segue. What responsibilities do we have for the persecuted church? Yeah, those are two big ones, right? Even if you can't be the one to bring them the Bible or food or whatever resources they need, supporting the missionaries here at church or supporting them in other places. Yeah, the big one is definitely prayer. It was going around a little bit ago, like a couple of months ago, but it was 31 prayers for the persecuted church, I think. I definitely think praying for them is a big one, and encouraging them in a more physical way, I think is definitely our response. I think that's the very least, we should definitely be doing. What else? Educating others. Yeah, educating others is a great one. Yeah, definitely educating others about, the martyrdom and persecution. So. All right, anything else? End of the spear. Okay, I knew there was one. All right, thank you. 2005. Oh, well, okay, I was off on the years. Wow, I didn't realize 2005 was that long ago. All right, so about 20, 21 years. Well, yeah, check it out. It sounds like an interesting story. I've never watched it but yeah, it's an interesting story. There's also one, too, on what we talked about last week about the martyrs in Japan that were crucified. I don't know the name of that one either. But, yeah, if you're interested in something like this, again, look, we could sit here all night and talk about stories, unfortunately, about people that, like these guys. I try to pick the most profound ones and kind of talk about how they represent the whole. Because, we do have a time crunch. You guys don't want to be here all night. Yeah, if you're interested, definitely dive into some of these other guys' stories. It definitely, in my opinion, strengthens your faith, strengthens mine. So, all right, thank you guys. Sorry, I don't want to hold you too long. Have a good one.